Welcome back to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. Produced by Charitable Communications, we tell the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. Proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. I am Bobby Keys. And we have Ruth. You there, Ruth?
I'm Ruth Baum Biggett. I am here, and we have another great lineup of talking with our nonprofits and those who work in the sector and outside the sector, with the sector.
Yeah. Inventing the sector, you know, and
there you go.
Yeah, and we're coming to you from safe locations during the current health environment, you know, coronavirus. So we're all staying safe. So that's why we all sound a little bit different. We're all basically broadcasting. Everybody's in their own dining room. I think technology is pretty cool.
It is a cool thing, and it is by technology that we are able to connect with one of our regular guests who brings us up to date and keeps us in the know with the sector, and that is David Renz with the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Ruth. It's a challenging time, but it's a time when I think part of what we have to remember is that part of the strength of our community is being with each other and sharing our thoughts, and I'm pleased to be with you.
Well, it's almost where to start with so much going on. Talk a little bit about, from your vantage point at the center, what's the impact? What are you all seeing going on right now as we all deal with this coronavirus?
Well, in a broad sense, it's fascinating and probably confusing, because for every example of somebody you see who is some organization you see that's trying to make things work one way, it doesn't apply to other nonprofits, because every mission category has its own sort of challenges. And so, you have to say at the beginning, just to talk about where we are on this crisis, that, I want to express my own thanks to all of our colleagues in the nonprofit community and the for-profit community who are putting themselves in harm's way, whether it's healthcare or the emergency assistance folks who are helping with food, housing, child and other kinds of care, mental health providers. I mean, there are so many different dimensions to this. And the demands overall on the nonprofit community are exceptional. Even the kinds of, the kinds of services that are being provided by governments, in fact, are typically being provided by nonprofits at the street level, even though they're funded by nonprofits, or by government, I mean. So, some of the national surveys now are looking a little tough. One of the surveys that just came across my desk of coping strategies identified of the 430-some executives that were surveyed in this particular thing, and again, this is national, not Kansas City, 83% of them moved their operations from some work location to home using that technology you were just mentioning. About 79% of them have shifted their programs and services to online. But of course, some of them can't do that. It just depends on the nature of the services. 19% of the organizations said they'd already laid off staff, but 56% of those on that survey expected additional reductions in staff, and even more than them expected cuts in services. So, as is true for the coronavirus overall, the nature of the impact shifts a bit from geography, one region to another, depending on the course of the illness in that region. Unfortunately, it's taken a fair number of nonprofits to the brink, and we've got some real challenges. Some giving is up, but some giving is taking a big hit. Springtime's a huge time for a lot of galas and fundraisers, and the ones that have continued are going to virtual mode, but a good share of them have been canceled. And so where is that money going to come from? it's really a pretty dynamic situation right now.
So, knowing of this data, and we're really, give or take, a month into lockdown or stay-at-home mode, let's talk here in the metro. What, if this should continue for another 4 weeks, and that's kind of today's projection of lockdown, and that's always a moving target, as we know. What, in your best wisdom, having followed this sector and done the research, what's your best guesstimate on what may happen once we get back to our new normal?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I like, but I'm also worried about the way you've ended the phrasing of your question, because there will be a new normal, and the thing we cannot assume, because it inevitably is the one thing we know is not true, is that it will go back to the way it was in January of 2020 or the year of 2019. Everything is shifting. We're in a sort of a chaotic neutral zone transitional time right now. But one of the things that's important from my perspective is that we remember survival is critical, and we need to do what we can to protect our organizations and sustain what we have while we make our way through this time. But we're also planting the seeds for the work that goes beyond this time. And so, we have to think beyond the crisis. Survival is good. I'm in favor of that. But the seeds of the future are being planted now. And so my pitch is to work on sustaining your core, trying to capitalize on or even enhance the resilience of your agency. And I have a few thoughts on what that means if you care to hear them. But
Yes.
But at the same time, then, the longer term calls on us to do more than survive. And at its best, and I can't be overly Pollyannish about it, but for all the toughness of these times, there's some silver linings that we can capitalize on now, and especially as we're transitioning into the future. We're using technology in interesting new ways. We're rethinking how we do many of the things that we're doing. And there's been a lot of phenomenal adaptation and innovation in many different categories of missions. I mean, some of it, hopefully, we don't have to continue, some of the medical healthcare strategies that are being used. But, there's a lot of courage, a lot of selfless behavior, a lot of people who are just stepping in and saying, hey, let's try this. Maybe it'll work. And so we have the opportunity right now to actually learn from these natural experiments. And it would be a shame if we just said, we just try to get through it and go back, because it's not going to be the same. But it's not going to be 100% different either. And so that's thinking strategically for the longer term.
I got a quick question. As far as the leadership goes in a nonprofit world, and, sticking with that, idea that things are they're not going to go back. You're going to have to adapt to technology. It kind of makes you wonder, do you think that a lot of the leadership will opt towards automation in the future, knowing that, obviously in the nonprofit world, you have to have that face-to-face time and at some point in time, whether that's virtually or, I think to convey that passion, but from a infrastructure, operational, it seems like that leaders might realize, like, okay, this isn't so bad. It saves money traveling and in some ways and maybe even cut down on rent and costs and other, do you see a transition like that?
I think that's a valid point. And it's going to vary from field to field, because different types of services, of course, have different degrees of personal face-to-face imperatives versus what you can do. I mean, it's amazing how connected we can be using Zoom. We're
Right.
using Zoom to teach a lot of our classes. I have about a dozen meetings a day on Zoom, and actually I'm about to just open some office hours so that people can call us, check in on Zoom just to talk through the problems and issues they're dealing with.
Yeah.
So we're adding some of these things, and it's going to be great from the perspective of efficiency. We have to keep going back to the core and the mission and ensuring that we're using, the mission and the key principles of our service to inform what those decisions are, Bobby. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to see is what really helps us sustain and enhance the kind of impact that we care about. One of the downsides, candidly, for the nonprofit world is that we're often investing in the infrastructure that actually enables these kinds of abilities or mm-hmm. capacities to be mobilized. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's one of the categories that we'll see some funders be willing to invest more in down the road as they see both how does it improve performance and efficiency in the organization, and God forbid we're back in another crisis scenario of some sort like this where we can't all be together. We have the resilience to hit the ground running. Mm-hmm. One of the things that was very fortunate for us at UMKC, both in teaching and in the work at the center, is that we were already shifting to more online programming and doing more. I'm teaching some classes often on via Zoom before this. So when the university said, wait a minute, nobody can come to campus anymore, we can't put people in the same room, it wasn't my first day, nor my colleagues' first days for most of them, to start using that technology. But what people miss is that was possible to do quickly because of the prior investments of the last few years in the IT and related infrastructure that enables this to happen.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to think about that. And what's really tough is as the budgets take a beating in this transitional time, it's harder to see your way clear to investing for the future, even though it's an imperative for survival. Mm.
David, in just a few minutes we have left, do you have a top 3 or 4 points that you can leave our listeners with that they could be doing homework? And I don't want to forget to mention that every Tuesday you all are already offering this navigation series that people can connect with and learn stuff. So please be able to share that with us too.
Yep. Well, we have the Navigator series, and candidly, even though we're not working in the usual offices, all of us at the Midwest Center are in fact accessible. And so whether it's to develop programs or workshops or just to talk through some issues and questions with us, people can drop us an email or give us a call, and we'll be able to follow up on that. A couple of the key points I'd offer, Ruth, are first and maybe foremost, in a time like this with the key disruptions that are going on, it's essential for nonprofits to go back and remember and affirm in their own thinking and strategizing, but in their communications with each other as well. What is at the core? What is this that's fundamentally at the mission? And make sure that we keep those things while we may have to drop some other programs or strategies along the way. Keeping support for our people is critical, and that's, some of this is the easiest and simplest and yet the toughest to remember to do. The communication that's essential, and that's connecting members of the board, of the staff, on both the content of our work, but also creating a little bit of social space, if you will, technologically, to just talk about how do we feel about what's going on and what's happening. It's people can find this terribly isolating, even when they're surrounded with a lot of folks in their homes, their new home offices or dining rooms, as Bobby said. We need to help people make sense of what's going on, and unfortunately, that sometimes even means owning up to the fact that we can't say exactly what the pace or timing is going to be. It is essential that we stay in touch with our funders and our donors. And sometimes when we're not able to make sense of how we're going to deliver on our programs, we kind of hide out. But the reality is our donors and funders, the granting agencies, they want to know how we're doing. And frankly, I've been impressed by the breadth of interest among foundations and government agencies in getting flexible with regard to deadlines and reports and things like that, because there's a lot of empathy for what is happening in the agencies. But they also need to hear from us, and we just have to keep helping people understand what is it that's happening here, even while we try to preserve our cash in our core. And frankly, nonprofits are often working in networks and collaborative relationships. Building on the power of that community is really significant to just staying sane and staying alive and moving as this environment keeps throwing new challenges at us.
Definitely staying sane. That is going to be key.
Sanity, mate. I'm not so sure I can promise sanity, but I'm shooting for it.
David, thank you so much. And for those who are listening, we want to make sure check out all the resources that the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership has. They can be reached. There's no excuse for not reaching out now. www.bloch.umkc.edu/MCNL, or just put in there Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership. You'll be able to find them. And David, as always, you've given great wisdom and great advice, and we appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Ruth and Bobby.
Thank you.
Stay safe and healthy.
COVID-19 is a severe lung infection. Trust the American Lung Association for science-based public health information, especially for the 36 million Americans who live with lung disease. We have resources to protect your lung health. Access expertise from medical professionals and peer-to-peer support through our online communities. Visit lung.org for daily updates or call 1-800-LUNG-USA.
Inspired by Ewan Marion Kaufman, the Kaufman Foundation believes that every person, regardless of their background, should have the opportunity to learn, to take risks, and to own their success. Working together with our Kansas City community and beyond, we take on approaches that break down barriers, providing people with the necessary skills throughout life to make or take a job and ultimately give back to their community. By listening to the communities we serve, tap into our learnings and relationships, and bring everyone together to build and support programs that improve education, boost entrepreneurship, and help Kansas City thrive. Learn more at Kaufman.org.